Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So as usual, let's talk about Tesla. We did get a big move today, right? As I said yesterday, I think a big move is coming. 3.85%, it's not, I guess, huge, but it is a decently large move, right? So that's something to consider, of course. Now, all that being said and done, let's just jump right into it. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button, but let's just get this party started. Still Tesla, like I said, ending the day down 3.85%, ending at pretty much $187, right? So what does this mean? What is happening? Is this bad? Is this good? Just, what does it mean? So first and foremost, the easiest, I guess not the easiest, but the most obvious thing to point out is the fact that, well, we did break out of this little bear flag that we were in, right? So this is not great, obviously, right? The fact that we broke out isn't great. Now, one thing we could potentially get is a retest up to maybe 195-ish to retest this little breakout potentially, right? That is very possible. And then most likely reject and then move downwards. Or in theory, maybe we can actually get back in. It's, you never know for sure. There's always a potential this is a fake breakdown. But for now, it is definitely looking more bearish than bullish for now, right? So what does it all mean? Where is this going to take us, right? So there's ways you can measure like a bear flag, right? The easiest way to usually measure a bear flag, which again, this is like a very, very rough way of doing it. Like you shouldn't be taking a look at what I just show you right now and be like, okay, this is, the only way, and this is pretty much the exact target. It has to go here. This is just an extremely rough way of doing it. But as an example, what you can do is you can take it from the current swing high to the bottom of the bear flag, right? So essentially what you would do is you would argue, you can make an argument this is a swing high or even this was a swing high, right? For, let's say, for the sake of, being a little conservative here, right? Let's just say this was a swing high off of this massive candle from up here. You can pretend like we went all the way down here, right? So this essentially can be the pole potentially, and then you measure this pole from the breakdown on the flag, which ends up being somewhere around here, which essentially brings us all the way down to that ultimate 150 price target, which is like that bear price target, right? Which, is possible. It is absolutely possible. For some reason though, something about this bear flag, just, I don't know what it is. This is one of those things I can't really put into words, maybe because the flag is so small or something. I'm not really sure how to explain it, to be completely honest with you. However, with that being said, it does feel like this flag is not going to actually bring us down that low. I don't know why. The flag seems way too small for that. It absolutely could. But again, you also want to keep in mind the fact that when you measure a bear flag like this, it's an extremely rough measurement, right? It absolutely does not have to follow that trajectory like whatsoever. It doesn't have to. But the point in the fact that is that we did break out of it to the south side, which is the bearish side, which isn't great. Again, one or two things can happen. Either we just continue falling from here, or we come up to retest the potential breakout, which again gives us a little bit of hope that maybe this ends up being a false breakdown, and then we come back right into it and then potentially rally through there. That is a possibility, but until that happens, obviously this is going to be more of a bearish situation than a bullish situation. So keep that in mind. Now, ultimately, regardless of whether we come back up to retest this thing or not, pretty much what I personally think that at the very least will happen, and that really just wouldn't surprise me, is we come down to around this kind of 180-ish level and maybe potentially, hopefully, fingers crossed, to do a double bottom, which is very, very possible. So we'll see if that ends up being something that does actually overall end up happening, right? But the major thing you want to pretty much be paying attention to is the fact that we are pretty much right here in this downward channel, as you can see, right? So this right here, in my opinion, I don't know why that was so weird. Let me go ahead and do that again. Why is it doing that? That's so strange. Let's try it on the daily. I don't know why it's like copying it and then pasting it in such a weird way, right? You can easily argue that we are in this kind of like a downward channel right here, right? You can also argue the fact that it's also maybe a channel, something like this. This touches more candles and we technically never actually close above this. So this channel would potentially make a little bit more sense. But essentially the way you want to look at it is that, we are potentially trading in this overall, like this ultimate downward channel, this massive downward channel, which we did touch 1, 2, 3, potentially coming down for the fourth touch, which would be extremely bearish if we actually come down all the way here. So again, take this with a grain of salt, of course, as usual, but it is technically a possibility. Or you could look at it like this, which then would make it a little bit less bearish looking, but it's still ultimately pretty bearish. But this would pretty much bring us down to that 150 level potentially, right? But again, this is just one of the potential many ways of looking at it. But I guess the easiest way to think about it is the fact that until we essentially break above this line, whether you want to look at it like this or you want to touch as many candles as possible, which I know a lot of people like to do as well, because it gives it more validity. But essentially until we break, at the very least, let's say out of this right here that we are at right now, which would essentially be anything above like 195 to 200 at this point, would essentially be breaking out of this little downward channel potentially. But until something like that happens, we are still ultimately in a downward channel, I guess, or downward play or momentum or whatever, right? That's something else to consider. Also, something else to consider today is there is very low volume. We're back to these old levels over here, which, you could argue is a good thing considering it is a fairly red day. Maybe that's kind of a bullish thing. The fact that we're falling in such low volume, maybe there's not a lot of conviction behind it, right? That is also a possibility. So keep that in mind. That is something to consider. But ultimately, the thing I'm looking at now is most likely I want to see a retest of this breakdown of this bear flag, which will essentially put us to about 195. If we get there and I start seeing rejections, I will go ahead and start selling longer dated calls as essentially a way to hedge this potential upcoming movement to the downside, right? That is essentially what I will be personally doing. Again, not financial advice, just my opinion. Make your own decisions, of course, as usual. But that's essentially what I'm seeing at the very moment, right? You can see we are kind of making our way back down now, unfortunately, which isn't great. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky situation that we're in. Another way to look at it to kind of get a better idea as to what Tesla might do is obviously taking a look at the market itself, right? So the VIX, you can see, is red actually on a red market day, which, like I always say, is suspicious, right? If the VIX follows the market on the downside, that's suspicious to like a bear trap. And then if it's the opposite, I think we had that yesterday actually, where the VIX was green on a green market day, I believe, then that's also suspicious as a bull trap, right? So keep that in mind. That's something to consider as well. But one thing you want to definitely pay attention to is the fact that the VIX definitely looks like it's still looking like it wants to potentially bounce from here, right? And then you also have the QQQ getting a false breakout, unfortunately, which really sucks because we did close back underneath this yellow line. Couldn't even get up to this level. So we'll see. It is still pretty damn close. So this still could go either way, in my opinion. But at the moment, it is starting to close at places that look a little bit more bearish. Top of that, you also have the SPY potentially forming like what looks to be a potential maybe inverted or just a head and shoulders pattern setting up. This could be the shoulder, this could be the head, then we can come down, potentially set up the shoulder over here, and then ultimately fall down. But until the SPY breaks this channel, it's hard to really be too bearish on SPY just yet. But that's something to consider, absolutely, right? Similar to what the QQQ is doing here. So the one thing that's disappointing is the fact that the market didn't rally up to where I thought it would, which I still think it might, at least the 200 moving average at 406 for SPY. The fact that we didn't even get to that is a little bit weird. I really thought we would at the very least touch this first and then, make our way down potentially. But the fact that we didn't is a little bit weird. Though that being said, the SPY is still setting on the daily higher highs on the RSI. As the market itself, I guess, is doing as well. So that's not too bad of a sign. So we'll see if that ends up forming into anything, important. But the TLDR, I guess, the quick rundown, if you will, as to what I'm personally expecting right now, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that I expect Tesla to, maybe if we're lucky, get a retest of this 195 level. If we do, most likely get rejected, probably fall back down, and maybe make our way down to, at the very least, in my opinion, get a double bottom at this kind of 180-ish level. And if that breaks, well, that's when we can start getting, a little bit scared, let's just say that. So that's when the 150s can potentially start coming into play. So we'll see if that actually ends up coming to fruition or not, and we'll, of course, play it as it comes. On top of that, you can see we are now, of course, below the 5 and the 10, which isn't great. And taking a look at the email, is still well above us, couldn't even get up to that, which is quite disappointing, actually. And of course, we also have the Bollinger Band, which we couldn't even get up to the white line, and now we're going straight back down to the red line potentially. You can see it's starting to expand a little bit more. And yeah, that's essentially what I'm seeing. So I did buy back my sold calls from yesterday, made some money on that. At least, it's better than nothing. And I did sell my smaller account yesterday, like I said. Thankfully, I did buy back in today, pretty much at 187 roughly, pretty much where we closed at today, slightly higher. But I started scaling slowly back in on my smaller account, and I will continue to do that if we continue showing weakness. And yeah, I pretty much saved myself about 6% or something like that off of yesterday's, maybe even 7% actually off of that on my smaller account. Unfortunately, my bigger account is, kind of locked and loaded, if you will, which kind of sucks. But, I am selling calls against the shares. So at least there is some, some money being made on this downside, even though it's obviously not offsetting the losses that the shares are giving me, right? But, the point is the fact that, these are shares that I'm personally perfectly okay holding for, long term, easily, like years, 5 years, like no problem whatsoever, right? This isn't money I absolutely need or anything like that anytime soon, but that's just my situation. That's just my opinion. That's just the position I am in, of course, right? Everyone has their own positions, for better or for worse. So make sure you understand what you're doing relative to your position, relative to your risk tolerance. That is very, very important. But yeah, that's essentially kind of what I'm seeing at the moment, ladies and gentlemen. Ultimately, again, maybe get a retest of 195 if we're lucky, but then ultimately most likely break down once again to probably at least a double bottom. And if that breaks, then, that's when things can get quite ugly. So we'll see what that kind of ends up forming. We'll see, guys. We'll see. This is a very volatile market. Could be bear traps being set up left and right as well. You never really know. It's a tough market to trade in. It's an extremely difficult market, so keep that in mind. But yeah, all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what happens continuing forward. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you for the next one. Peace.